The cruelest secrets are often spoken in front of the person they hurt the most. Emily Carter stood quietly beside the enormous palace window as snow drifted across the kingdom beyond the glass. The northern capital looked beautiful at dusk. Thousands of lights glowed beneath the fading blue sky. Stone towers rose above winding streets. Golden lanterns reflected on icy pathways. To anyone looking from the outside, it seemed like the perfect place to begin a perfect life. Emily knew better. She adjusted the sleeve of her cream-colored dress and lowered her eyes as servants hurried through the corridor carrying documents and silver trays. Everything inside the palace moved with purpose. Advisors attended meetings. Guards changed shifts. Noble families arrived for evening gatherings. Life never slowed around Alpha King Lucas Blackwood. Emily had lived inside the palace for 6 months now. 6 months since the mating ceremony that united 2 territories and shocked half the kingdom. Most people still whispered about it. The Alpha King had chosen an Omega from another region. An Omega raised far beyond the northern borders. An Omega who supposedly did not understand their language. The misunderstanding had started on her first day. Emily remembered it clearly. She had answered a greeting in English while exhausted from travel. One noble misunderstood. Another repeated the rumor. Within a week, most of the palace believed she understood only a few basic phrases of the northern tongue. Emily never corrected them. At first, it seemed harmless. Then it became useful. People revealed their true selves when they believed she could not understand them. Servants spoke honestly around her. Advisors forgot to filter their opinions. Nobles showed exactly who they were. And Lucas spoke more freely than anyone. Emily walked through the corridor and entered one of the smaller reception halls. Warm firelight flickered against polished stone walls. Several council members sat around a large wooden table reviewing reports. Lucas stood near the fireplace, tall and composed, listening as an advisor discussed trade agreements. His dark suit was perfectly tailored. His expression remained calm and unreadable. Everything about him projected confidence. Authority seemed to follow him naturally. Emily paused near the doorway. She had no reason to interrupt the meeting. She only needed to deliver a document and leave. One of the council members noticed her and smiled politely. Then he turned toward Lucas and switched into the northern language. "Your mate is early." Lucas glanced toward Emily. His silver eyes met hers briefly before returning to the council. "She will wait patiently," he replied in the same language. "Besides, she does not understand enough for this discussion to bore her." Laughter moved around the table. Emily felt a familiar ache inside her chest. Small, sharp, easy to hide. She understood every word, every single one. She lowered her gaze and offered a polite smile. Then she crossed the room and placed the document beside Lucas without saying anything. The conversation continued immediately. No hesitation, no caution, no awareness. Emily understood, and she said nothing. That had become her role. Listen, smile, stay silent. Outside, snow continued falling beyond the palace windows. Inside, Lucas returned to the meeting, completely unaware that the woman standing only a few feet away understood every word spoken in the room. And before the evening was over, Emily would hear something that would change everything she thought she knew about her mate. The meeting lasted nearly 2 hours. Emily remained in the reception hall the entire time, sitting quietly beside a tall bookshelf with a notebook resting on her lap. To everyone else, she appeared distracted by sketches and simple notes. In reality, she followed every conversation with perfect understanding. Trade negotiations, border security, harvest forecasts, political alliances. Nothing escaped her. Occasionally, one of the council members would glance toward her and lower his voice. Lucas would simply shake his head. "Do not worry," he would say in the northern language. "She does not understand enough to follow any of this." Each time, polite laughter followed. Each time, Emily smiled faintly and continued writing. Emily understood, and she said nothing. By the time the meeting ended, darkness had settled across the kingdom. Snow continued drifting beyond the palace windows, soft white flakes illuminated by lantern light. Council members gathered their documents and prepared to leave. The room slowly emptied until only Lucas and Emily remained. For a brief moment, silence settled between them. The fire crackled gently inside the stone hearth. Lucas loosened the collar of his jacket and released a tired breath. Without the council watching, he looked younger somehow. Less like a king, more like a man carrying responsibilities nobody else could fully understand. Emily watched him organize papers on the table. Despite everything, she still admired him. That was the problem. It would have been easier if she disliked him. Easier if his careless assumptions had made her angry. Instead, every day seemed to reveal another reason to care about him. Lucas glanced up. "Long day?" he asked in English. Emily nodded. "Very long." A small smile appeared on his face. "You should get some rest." "You should too." The smile lingered for a second before disappearing. Kings do not get much rest. Emily wanted to tell him she understood that sentence better than he realized. She wanted to tell him she understood far more than anyone in the palace believed. Instead, she simply nodded. The familiar silence returned. Then footsteps echoed outside the room. 2 senior advisors entered carrying additional reports. Their arrival immediately changed the atmosphere. Lucas straightened. The king returned. One advisor placed a folder on the table and switched into the northern language. "We also need to discuss the succession issue." Emily felt her attention sharpen. Succession discussions usually involve future heirs, alliances, and political expectations. Lucas looked exhausted. "Now, the council wants clarity." The advisor hesitated before continuing. "Many still question whether the mating bond was the correct choice." Emily lowered her eyes to her notebook. Her pulse slowed, then slowed again. She had heard similar conversations before. Usually they did not bother her. Usually. Lucas stared at the folder for several seconds. Snow tapped softly against the window behind him. Finally, he spoke. "I know what the council thinks." The room grew quiet. The advisors exchanged looks. One of them lowered his voice. "And what do you think?" Lucas leaned back in his chair. For the first time all evening, uncertainty crossed his face. It lasted only a moment, but Emily saw it. "I do not know," he admitted quietly. "Some days I wonder if fate made a mistake." Emily stopped breathing. The notebook nearly slipped from her hands. Neither advisor noticed. Neither advisor looked at her. They all believed the Omega sitting beside the bookshelf could not understand a single word. Lucas rubbed his forehead and stared into the fire. "She is kind," he continued. "She deserves respect. But the bond does not feel the way everyone promised it would." Emily felt something inside her chest crack silently. The fire continued burning. Snow continued falling. Nobody in the room noticed the change in her expression. Emily understood, and she said nothing. Emily slept very little that night. Long after the palace corridors fell silent and the last lanterns dimmed beyond her window, Lucas's words continued echoing through her mind. "Some days I wonder if fate made a mistake." The sentence replayed over and over until it seemed woven into the darkness itself. She lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant sound of winter wind brushing against stone walls. 6 months. She had spent 6 months trying to be patient, trying to understand, trying to believe that the distance between them would eventually disappear. Now she understood something painful. The distance was not accidental. Lucas felt it too. Morning arrived beneath a pale gray sky. Fresh snow covered the palace gardens and transformed the kingdom into a landscape of white and silver. Emily stood beside her bedroom window holding a cup of tea between her hands. Below, servants carefully cleared pathways through the snow while guards rotated shifts near the main gates. Life continued exactly as it always had. The world had not changed. Only her heart had. A knock sounded at the door. "Come in," she called. One of the palace attendants entered carrying several invitations. "These are for tonight's winter gala." Emily accepted the stack and offered a polite smile. After the attendant left, she looked through them one by one. Noble families, foreign ambassadors, business leaders. Every important person in the kingdom would attend, which meant she would spend another evening standing beside Lucas while pretending everything was normal. The thought exhausted her. Hours later, the palace transformed into a celebration of light and music. Crystal chandeliers illuminated enormous halls. String musicians performed near marble staircases. Guests arrived wearing elegant gowns and tailored suits. Snow drifted softly beyond towering windows. To outsiders, the royal couple appeared perfect. Emily knew how convincing appearances could be. She stood beside Lucas near the center of the ballroom, greeting visitors as they arrived. Every smile felt carefully practiced. Every conversation felt distant. Lucas seemed unaware of any difference. He thanked guests, accepted compliments, discussed politics and trade. Occasionally, he glanced toward Emily and offered a polite smile. She returned it every time. The performance continued. Then she heard it again. A group of council members approached the king near the refreshment tables. The conversation shifted naturally into the northern language. As always, nobody bothered lowering their voices. As always, nobody imagined she could understand. "Your Majesty," one advisor said, "public support for the mating bond continues to decline." Lucas took a sip of water. "I am aware." Another advisor hesitated before speaking. Many expected a stronger connection by now. Emily stared at the ballroom floor. Lucas remained silent for several seconds. Then came the answer she would remember forever. "So did I." The music continued playing. Guests continued laughing. Glasses continued clinking throughout the ballroom. Yet everything around Emily suddenly felt distant, as though she were standing underwater. Lucas's voice remained calm, honest, unaware. "Emily is a good person," he said. "She has done nothing wrong. But sometimes being a good person is not enough to create what fate intended." Emily felt her fingers tighten around the stem of her glass. Her smile never moved. Her posture never changed. Nobody noticed anything. Nobody except one elderly servant standing across the room. Their eyes met briefly. Something in the woman's expression softened, as though she sensed the hurt hidden behind Emily's composure. Emily looked away first. She understood, and she said nothing. But for the first time since arriving at the palace, a quiet question formed in her mind. If Lucas truly believed fate had made a mistake, then why was she still staying? The question refused to leave her alone. Emily carried it through the following days like a stone hidden inside her pocket. Heavy, constant, impossible to ignore. If Lucas truly believed fate had made a mistake, why was she still here? Every morning she woke before sunrise and performed the duties expected of a royal mate. She attended meetings, visited charitable programs, represented the palace during public events, smiled for photographs, thanked guests, listened politely to endless conversations. From the outside, nothing had changed. Inside, everything had. The palace felt different now, not because the walls had changed or because the people behaved differently. The difference lived entirely inside her. Once she had listened to Lucas's private conversations out of curiosity. Now she listened because she could not stop herself. Part of her still hoped to hear something that would undo the damage. Some explanation, some hidden feeling, some evidence that she had misunderstood him. Instead, every conversation seemed to deepen the wound. One snowy afternoon, Emily entered the palace conservatory carrying a folder of correspondence. The enormous glass structure overlooked the winter gardens. Sunlight filtered through frosted panes and painted soft patterns across the stone floor. She paused near a row of white roses growing beneath the glass ceiling. The room was empty except for two voices coming from the far side. Lucas and Nathaniel Cross, his oldest advisor. Emily immediately recognized the northern language. She froze before they noticed her. "You seem distracted lately," Nathaniel said. Lucas released a quiet breath. "Perhaps. This is about your mate." Silence followed. Emily stood perfectly still beside the roses. "Partially," Lucas admitted. Nathaniel waited. "I keep expecting something to change." "What kind of change?" Lucas looked toward the snow-covered gardens outside. "I do not know." His answer sounded frustrated. Honest. Everyone describes the bond as certainty, as if the world suddenly makes sense. "I have never felt that." Emily lowered her eyes. The familiar ache returned, stronger this time. Nathaniel remained thoughtful. "And Emily?" Lucas's expression softened slightly. "She is remarkable." Emily's heart betrayed her immediately. Hope flickered despite everything. Then Lucas continued. "That is what makes this difficult." The hope vanished. "She is kind, intelligent, patient, better than I deserve in many ways." He looked away. "But feelings do not appear simply because someone deserves them." Nathaniel said nothing. Neither did Emily. The conservatory felt colder suddenly. The winter sunlight no longer seemed warm. Emily understood, and she said nothing. A few minutes later, she quietly retreated before either man could discover she had been there. She spent the rest of the afternoon wandering through the palace corridors carrying documents she barely remembered reading. Faces blurred together. Conversations faded into background noise. By evening, she found herself standing alone in the royal library. Snow drifted outside the tall windows. The room smelled faintly of old books and cedar wood. Emily stared at the shelves without seeing them. Her reflection looked back from the dark glass. Tired, quiet, lost. For 6 months, she had convinced herself that patience would solve everything. Love could grow slowly, she told herself. Trust required time. Understanding required effort. Now she wondered if she had been waiting for something that was never going to happen. A sound behind her interrupted the thought. Lucas had entered the library. He smiled when he saw her. The smile was warm, genuine, the kind of smile that would have made her heart race only weeks ago. "There you are," he said in English. "I have been looking for you." Emily smiled back automatically. The habit felt effortless now. "Did you need something?" Lucas nodded. "Just wanted to see how your day was." Emily stared at him for a moment. He looked sincere, concerned even, and somehow that hurt more than the conversations. Because Lucas cared about her. She knew he did. He simply did not love her. And he still had no idea she understood every word that had broken her heart. The decision came quietly. There was no dramatic moment, no argument, no tears in front of witnesses. Emily simply woke one morning and realized she could not spend the rest of her life waiting for someone to choose her with certainty. Snow continued falling outside the palace windows as winter deepened across the kingdom. The world looked peaceful. Inside her heart, everything felt exhausted. For nearly 2 weeks after the conversation in the library, she moved through each day exactly as before. She attended events, smiled during public appearances, shared meals with Lucas, answered questions from visiting dignitaries. Nobody noticed anything different. If anything, she became even better at hiding her feelings. Years of patience had prepared her well. Lucas certainly noticed nothing. Sometimes he would ask if she was tired. Sometimes he would suggest taking a day to rest. Sometimes he would bring her tea after long meetings because he knew she preferred it over coffee. Every small kindness only made the situation harder. Lucas was not cruel. He was not neglectful. He was not a villain in anyone's story. That was what made leaving so painful. If he had treated her badly, the choice would have been easy. Instead, he treated her with respect while unknowingly breaking her heart. One afternoon, Emily sat alone inside her private sitting room. A fire burned softly in the hearth. Snowflakes drifted beyond the windows. A blank sheet of paper rested on the desk in front of her. She stared at it for nearly an hour before touching the pen. The words refused to come at first. Then slowly, one sentence appeared. "Dear Lucas." Emily stopped writing immediately. Her hand trembled slightly. She closed her eyes, opened them again, then continued. The letter grew one line at a time. Careful, honest, calm. Not a letter filled with blame. Not a letter designed to hurt him. Simply the truth. The truth she had carried alone for 6 months. By evening the letter was finished. Emily folded the pages carefully and placed them inside an envelope. Her chest felt strangely lighter afterward. Not happy, not relieved, just certain. For the first time in months, certainty belonged to her. The following morning, she began making quiet preparations. She packed only what truly mattered. A few books, family photographs, personal keepsakes, simple clothing, nothing extravagant, nothing that belonged to the palace. Every item fit neatly into 2 travel cases. She moved slowly, methodically, while servants remained busy elsewhere. Nobody suspected anything unusual. Shortly before sunset, Emily walked through the palace one final time. She passed the conservatory where she had overheard conversations she was never supposed to understand. She passed the library where Lucas had smiled at her only days earlier. She passed the grand ballroom where she had stood beside him while listening to words that still echoed inside her mind. Every room held a memory. Every memory carried both warmth and pain. Eventually, she reached Lucas's private office. The room was empty. A meeting with regional leaders had taken him outside the capital for the day. Emily stood beside his desk for several seconds. Then she placed the envelope in the center where he could not possibly miss it. Snow drifted beyond the office windows. The fading afternoon light touched the paper softly. Emily stared at the letter one final time. Written entirely in the northern language. Perfect grammar. Perfect spelling. Perfect understanding. A secret she had protected for 6 months now rested inside those pages. She turned away before doubt could find her. Minutes later, a carriage rolled through the palace gates and disappeared into the falling snow. No announcement. No farewell. No dramatic goodbye. By the time Alpha King Lucas Blackwood returned to the palace that evening, his mate was already gone. Lucas returned to the palace just after sunset. Snow covered the capital in a blanket of white, and the carriage ride from the regional summit had left him exhausted. All he wanted was a quiet evening, a warm meal, and perhaps a few peaceful minutes with Emily before another day of responsibilities began. The thought came naturally. It surprised him how often it did now. Over the past 6 months, Emily had become part of the rhythm of his life. Her presence was steady, comfortable, easy to rely on. He did not think about that very often, at least not until she was gone. He entered the palace through the western corridor and immediately sensed something unusual. Servants moved through the hallways with uncertain expressions. Conversations seemed shorter. Eyes lingered on him a little too long before looking away. Lucas frowned. "What happened?" he asked one attendant. The young man hesitated. "Your Majesty," Lady Emily requested no formal announcement. Lucas stopped walking. "Announcement?" The attendant swallowed nervously. "She left this afternoon." The world seemed to pause. "Left?" The word sounded strange even to him. The attendant nodded. "A carriage departed several hours ago." Lucas stared at him, waiting for the rest of the explanation. None came. "Where did she go?" "We do not know, Your Majesty." Lucas stood perfectly still. The palace corridors suddenly felt much colder than before. Emily had left. The idea refused to make sense. There had been no argument, no disagreement, nothing unusual. He thanked the attendant automatically and continued toward his office, though he barely remembered crossing the distance. Something felt wrong, deeply wrong. When he opened the office door, he saw the envelope immediately. It rested in the center of his desk exactly where Emily intended him to find it. Lucas recognized her handwriting instantly. His chest tightened. He stepped forward and picked up the letter. Then everything stopped, because the words written on the front were not English. They were written in flawless Northern script. Lucas stared at the envelope. Once, twice, 3 times. His mind struggled to process what he was seeing. The grammar was perfect, the handwriting confident. There was no possibility of mistake. Slowly, he opened the letter. His hands were no longer steady. Snow drifted beyond the office windows while silence filled the room. Lucas began reading. The first sentence stole the air from his lungs. "Dear Lucas, I understood every word." His eyes froze on the page. The room disappeared. The palace disappeared. Everything disappeared except those 5 words. "I understood every word." He read the sentence again, then again. The meaning remained unchanged. Emily understood the language. She always had. Lucas sank slowly into the chair behind his desk. The letter trembled slightly in his hands. His heartbeat had become strangely loud. He continued reading. Every paragraph revealed another truth. Every line carried memories he suddenly saw differently. Meetings, conversations, jokes, private discussions, casual remarks. She had understood all of them, every single one. Then came the sentences that shattered whatever certainty remained inside him. She repeated his own words back to him. "Exactly. Some days I wonder if fate made a mistake. The bond does not feel the way everyone promised it would. Being a good person is not enough to create what fate intended." Lucas stared at the page as though seeing a ghost. Those were his words. His exact words. Words he had spoken believing she could never understand them. Words she had carried alone. Outside, snow continued falling across the kingdom. Inside the office, Alpha King Lucas Blackwood sat motionless with the letter in his hands, finally realizing that the person he thought understood him least had understood him completely. Lucas read the letter 3 times before he reached the end. Then he read it again. The palace clock marked the passing hours somewhere beyond the office walls, but time no longer felt real. Every sentence seemed to reveal a new wound he had never known existed. Emily had not filled the pages with accusations. That would have been easier to endure. She had not called him cruel. She had not blamed him for her pain. Instead, she had simply told the truth. That was what made it unbearable. She described evenings spent smiling through conversations she fully understood. Meetings where she sat quietly while people discussed her future as though she were not present. Moments when she listened to him question their bond while standing only a few feet away. There was no anger in her words, only sadness, and somehow that hurt far more. Lucas lowered the letter and stared at the snow beyond the office window. The kingdom looked exactly the same as it had that morning. The towers still stood. The lanterns still glowed. Life continued, yet everything inside him felt different. Memories surfaced one after another. Emily sitting beside the fireplace, reading while he worked late into the night. Emily bringing tea to exhausted staff members during winter storms. Emily listening patiently whenever he spoke about responsibilities that nobody else seemed to understand. He had always assumed she was quiet because she struggled with the language. Now every memory carried a different meaning. She had never been confused. She had been listening, truly listening, more than anyone else. A knock sounded at the office door. Nathaniel Cross entered after receiving permission. One look at Lucas was enough for the advisor to stop speaking. "Your Majesty?" Lucas handed him the letter without a word. Nathaniel read the first page, then the second. His expression slowly changed. By the time he reached the end, the room had fallen silent once more. "She understood everything," Nathaniel said quietly. Lucas nodded. The movement felt heavy. "Everything." Nathaniel looked down at the letter again. "How long?" "Since the beginning." The advisor exhaled slowly. Neither man spoke for several moments. Finally, Nathaniel placed the letter on the desk. "You did not know." Lucas laughed softly. The sound contained no humor. "That does not make it better." His eyes returned to the pages. "She heard every doubt, every careless remark, every time I questioned us." Nathaniel remained silent because there was nothing to say. Lucas rose from his chair and crossed the office. Snow drifted through the darkness beyond the glass. He remembered conversations he had completely forgotten until now. Small comments made during council meetings. Observations spoken without thought. Questions asked during difficult days. At the time they felt harmless. Now they felt devastating. Emily had carried them all. Alone. She never defended herself, Lucas said quietly. She never argued. Nathaniel looked toward him. "Perhaps because she loved you." The words landed harder than anything else that evening. Lucas closed his eyes. Suddenly he understood why Emily never corrected anyone. Why she always smiled. Why she remained patient even when others underestimated her. She had been protecting the people around her from embarrassment. Protecting him most of all. The realization settled heavily inside his chest. For months, he had wondered why the bond never felt the way everyone described. Now another possibility appeared. What if the distance had never come from fate? What if it came from the walls he built himself? Lucas opened his eyes and looked toward the empty chair where Emily often sat during long evenings in the office. The chair remained exactly where it always had. For the first time since receiving the letter, he noticed the silence she left behind. And suddenly the palace felt far too large without her in it. Lucas did not sleep that night. The letter remained on his desk long after midnight, its pages worn from being read again and again. Every time he reached the final line, he returned to the beginning, as though repetition might somehow change the ending. It never did. Emily was gone. The truth remained unchanged. By dawn, the palace staff had already noticed something was wrong. The Alpha King usually followed a strict schedule. Morning briefings, council meetings, reports, public appearances. Today, none of those things happened on time. Lucas sat alone in his office watching pale winter sunlight creep across the floor. Snow continued falling beyond the windows. The kingdom moved forward without him. For the first time in years, he found himself unable to focus on matters of state. Every thought returned to Emily. He remembered the first week after their mating ceremony. She had arrived in an unfamiliar kingdom surrounded by strangers. Despite her uncertainty, she greeted everyone with kindness. She learned names quickly, remembered birthdays, thanked servants personally. Somehow she made people feel seen. Lucas had admired those qualities without fully understanding their value. Now the memories came one after another. Emily leaving warm meals outside offices when advisors worked late. Emily staying beside sick palace staff until doctors arrived. Emily quietly donating portions of her personal allowance to struggling families. None of those actions had been performed for attention. Most people never even knew about them. She simply cared. The realization settled heavily over him. Not once in her letter had Emily listed her sacrifices. She could have. She had every right to. Instead, she wrote only about understanding. Understanding his language. Understanding his doubts. Understanding his fears. Understanding him. A knock sounded at the office door. Nathaniel entered carrying several reports. He stopped immediately when he saw Lucas. "You have not left this room." Lucas looked away from the window. "No." Nathaniel placed the reports aside without mentioning them. "Have you considered where she might have gone?" Lucas laughed softly again. That humorless sound had become far too familiar. Every 5 minutes, the advisor remained silent. Lucas walked toward the desk and picked up the letter. Do you know what I cannot stop thinking about? Nathaniel waited. Every time I spoke honestly, she listened. Lucas stared at the pages. Every fear, every uncertainty, every foolish thing I said. His voice lowered, and she stayed. The room fell silent, because both men understood what that meant. Emily had not left after the first hurtful conversation, or the second, or the third. She stayed for months, hoping, trying, believing, until eventually there was nothing left to hold on to. Lucas closed his eyes briefly. The weight in his chest had become almost physical. I kept waiting for certainty, he said quietly, while she was giving me loyalty every single day. Nathaniel's expression softened. Sometimes certainty arrives slowly. Lucas looked toward the empty chair again, the one Emily always occupied during evening discussions. The chair remained empty, and suddenly something inside him broke. Not dramatically, not loudly. There was no shouting, no destruction, only silence. Lucas sat down and lowered his head into his hands. For years he had carried the responsibilities of a kingdom without allowing himself to fall apart. He solved problems, managed crises, made impossible decisions. He endured everything. But this felt different, because this loss belonged entirely to him. No counsel could fix it. No strategy could repair it. No title could protect him from it. The person who understood him best had walked away believing she was not enough, and he had given her every reason to believe it. Outside, snow continued falling across the kingdom. Inside the office, the Alpha King finally allowed himself to feel the full weight of what he had lost. And for the first time since Emily left, he knew exactly what he had to do next. By sunrise the following morning, the decision had already been made. Lucas stood before the palace gates while snow drifted through the cold winter air. A small travel bag rested beside him. The royal council was furious. Advisors argued. Schedules were abandoned. Meetings were postponed. None of it mattered. For the first time in years, the Alpha King was choosing something for himself. Emily had spent 6 months fighting for their bond alone. The least he could do was spend a few days searching for her. The journey carried him far beyond the capital, through snow-covered towns, across frozen rivers, past villages where palace titles meant very little. Everywhere he went, he asked the same question. Had anyone seen a young woman named Emily Carter? Most people shook their heads. A few offered directions. Others remembered a traveler matching her description. Every answer pushed him farther from the kingdom he ruled. Days passed. During long hours on the road, Lucas found himself replaying countless memories. Not the painful conversations, the quiet ones. Emily laughing with children during public visits. Emily reading beside the fireplace late at night. Emily bringing him tea after difficult council meetings without being asked. The more distance grew between them, the clearer those memories became. Somewhere along the way, he stopped wondering whether fate had made a mistake. The question no longer mattered. What mattered was the woman who had stayed when she had every reason to leave. 3 days later, he arrived at a small train station near the southern border. Snow had turned to cold rain. Water dripped from the station roof in steady rhythms. Travelers hurried through the platform carrying luggage and umbrellas. Lucas almost turned away. The place was crowded. The chances were small. Then he saw her. Emily stood beneath a covered waiting area, holding a travel bag. She looked smaller somehow without the palace surrounding her. Simpler. Freer. For a moment Lucas could only stare. Relief hit him so hard he nearly laughed. She was real. She was safe. She was here. Emily looked up. Their eyes met across the platform. Surprise crossed her face first. Then uncertainty. Then something carefully guarded. Neither moved. Rain continued falling around them. Announcements echoed through the station. Travelers passed between them. Yet the distance somehow felt greater than any road he had traveled. Lucas took a step forward. Then another. Finally, he stopped a few feet away. Emily remained silent. I read your letter, he said quietly. She nodded. I know. Her voice sounded calm. Lucas looked at her for several seconds. There were dozens of speeches he had prepared during the journey. Explanations. Apologies. Promises. Most of them vanished the moment he saw her. I was wrong, he said. About many things. Emily lowered her eyes briefly. Rain tapped softly against the station roof. Lucas. No, he shook his head gently. For months I kept waiting for certainty to arrive. I never noticed it was already there. Emily looked back at him. Lucas smiled sadly. The person who understood me best was standing beside me the entire time. Silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable silence. The kind that appears when two people finally stop hiding. A train whistle echoed in the distance. Emily glanced toward the tracks, then back at him. Lucas did not know what she would choose. He had no right to expect forgiveness. No right to demand another chance. So he simply stood there in the rain and waited. This time, he was finally listening.